So, welcome back. Can't wait. The last one was on fire. I love this. When we start getting into the non-physical self, non-linear space-time, past lives that aren't past lives, which we're going to get into, and so forth, I start getting super juiced up. This is the terrain I love. And so, first of all, let's talk about the human being in our non-linear countenance, what that means, what that is, where it lives, and then we'll go into how it interfaces with us, and so forth.
So in the last show we were talking about, when we were watching people's brains try to change their brains. This is what most people do. We actually try to use our ego to change our ego. We try to use the program to change the program. And it's like we're fighting against ourselves. And if you see a brain scan of somebody do that, their brain actually goes more into hypercoherence, more into conscious beta, high beta thinking. In other words,
monkey brain.
They're actually getting where they're analyzing themselves within their emotions that they've memorized, and basically they're analyzing or thinking in the past, and it drives their brain further out of balance. So when I saw this, it was a classic moment for me because I couldn't take my eyes off it. I kept thinking about it and how we've all tried to do this. And so in our work, what we teach people how to do is, and when the brain's doing that, you get very narrow focused, you get very object focused, you obsess about something, a problem, a thing, you loop. And it causes our awareness to become very, very what's called convergent. And what the research has shown, both in our work and other work, is that when you teach people how to become aware of the space around them in space, then all of a sudden the brain starts to get more organized. When the brain moves into that hypercoherent state, different compartments of the brain that are normally talking to each other no longer communicate with each other.
It's funny because when you say hypercoherent, most people think of coherence as a good thing, a balancing thing.
Right. So good coherence means there's a good rhythm. There's rhythm, there's synchrony, there's order, there's a pulse, there's a beat. Hypercoherence means it's too fast and it's too brain's working, it's hyper-incoherent, we should say.
That's right. Yeah.
So in that state of hyper-incoherence, when the stress chemicals are running, when you're under stress and I'm under stress, we become very selfish. That's what those hormones do. We think that we're our bodies, we think that we're our identity identifying with the environment, and we think we're living in linear time. That's what those hormones do. If the zebra's being chased by the lion, she's saying, I got to take care of my body, I got to put my awareness on it. Where in my environment am I going to go and how much time do I have to get there? So think, the majority of people that live their life spend their life in these limited altered states, which psychology calls normal states of consciousness. They're altered states. So then, just like you and I were living in that selfish state, endorsing the ego to become selfish, self-indulgent, self-important, self-centered, self-aggrandizing, self-absorbed. The brain does the exact same thing. The neurons in the brain that should be communicating in networks across vast landscapes, all of a sudden they're saying there's an emergency, so I'm going to close down, and my neighborhood's not going to talk to this neighborhood, this community's not going to talk to this community, this whole state or region's not going to talk to that region. The brain starts to become very subdivided, right? So that's a very incoherent state, and it sends a very incoherent signal down the central nervous system, which creates a very incoherent message to the immune system, to the digestive system, to the cardiovascular system. It's a group of people playing drums that have no rhythm, and the body really begins to suffer the effects because the central nervous system controls and coordinates all other systems. So then, as it sends a signal to the immune system saying, I don't know how to make white blood cells with that signal. I don't know how to keep the timing between my digestion working. I don't know how to keep my heart in balance with the brain. And so the body begins to suffer. So when people begin to put their awareness and open or cause a divergent focus instead of a convergent focus, that opening of attention, what people don't realize is this is who you really are, right?
Yes.
So this field around your body is who you really are. When you're functioning by the hormones of stress, you're more particle and less energy. You're more matter and less wave. That's the function of what those hormones do. We become materialists, right? And we define reality with our senses. So energy contracts. So then when you begin to put your awareness on the space around your body in space, that field around your body is consciousness. That's who we really are. The moment you put your awareness on that consciousness, on that space, something amazing happens. The brain starts getting very orderly, and you're no longer using the brain to try to change the brain. You're no longer using the ego to try to change the brain. or the ego, or you're not using the program to try to change the program. You're using consciousness to change the program, the brain and the ego, because this is you. And so some people would say, well, that's not me, I can't feel that. And I'd say, well, you don't feel your nose unless you put your awareness on it. You don't feel your little toe unless you become aware of it, right? So if you don't put your awareness on this field, wherever you put your attention or wherever you put your awareness is where energy follows. Energy follows awareness. So the moment you start putting your awareness and your attention on this sphere around you, now you're beginning to introduce yourself to who you are. You're starting to get acquainted with the true self. And when we study that on the scans, we saw the brain all of a sudden having dominion over the program, having ability to change the brain, because consciousness is the only thing that can change
Let's
it.
talk about that for a moment, because you're referring to the tests that were done, I assume, with Jeffrey Fannin and Konstantin Kurakov. One is doing neurofeedback, and the other is measuring the field at large of the physical, of the body and of the surrounding area.
Sure, we're not doing neurofeedback, we're using quantitative EEG to really see where people are at. Yeah.
So those are the just for clarification, those are the tests you're talking about. So when people start connecting with their non-linear selves by intention, what does that look like on the EEG, for example?
Well, the first thing that happens is that you start seeing the analytical thinking neocortex starting to settle down. So now you're no longer analyzing. And so the moment you're no longer analyzing, your brain waves move from, of course, beta to alpha. Now, when you're functioning by the hormones of stress, you believe that the outer world is more real than the inner world. That's the seduction. In other words, when the brain is in a high arousal state, we're functioning and determining reality with our senses. So because we're functioning by our senses, we're focusing on the particle of the atom instead of the wave of possibility, right? So then everything collapses into the known. So when you shift your awareness to the space around you in space, it means you can't think. And when you sense the space around you, you're not thinking, you're sensing. And what happens is the thinking neocortex tends to slow down, and the brain waves tend to get slower. You start producing what's called alpha brain waves. And in alpha, alpha is the imaginary world. It's where the inner world starts becoming more real than the outer world. And the way we learn is we learn information, and then we're in beta, we're in low levels of beta. We're in beta right now, we're relaxed. If I said to you, hey, listen, you can't eat lunch unless you take a test that I have, it's 75 questions, and then we can eat lunch.
That takes you into high beta.
You would go into mid beta. You'd be like, I better perk up and listen to what he says. But if you're freaked out, neurotic, emotional, insecure, frustrated, guilty, judgmental, you're going into high range beta. And now, no new information can enter into the nervous system that isn't equal to the emotion. In other words, the brain never has a chance to consolidate knowledge, because it's not a time to learn, it's a time to run. So there's a tiger around the corner, it's a time for emergency, right?
We talked about this last time, just we touched on it a little bit, and that's why most people can't break that programming except through, as you say, trauma, something even louder than what's already there.
Right, so then when we begin to teach people how to break that addiction and slow the body back down again, and their brain is moving from beta down the steps, and they're going inward, that alpha pattern then is when you consolidate new circuits in your brain. So like I know when I'm lecturing that people are getting information because I'll develop a concept or an idea, and as I develop the concept or an idea, they'll go from the outer world listening to me to the inner world of actually consolidating the knowledge. They'll pause and the brain will move into alpha. When that happens, the brain stores it in its circuitry. So when we learn, we move into alpha. So if you're in high beta, you never, ever get any new information in there. So in alpha, the imaginary world, the inner world becomes more real. And what we noticed on our scans is that the beta patterns tend to slow down, and we start to get these really broad, healthy alpha patterns, and the person now is creating coherent, orderly, rhythmic patterns, and different compartments of the brain are shaking hands. Different areas of the brain, the left side's talking to the right side, the front is talking to the back. All of a sudden we're getting this psychic union going on, and different neighborhoods are saying, she's out of the way. Every time I leave my body, the first thing my body always says is, thank God he's out of the way. And I see my body laughing while I'm standing there because it's relieved that the operators had a chance to heal, So That's exactly what happens, is that the moment that we're out of the way, the moment we're not our body, the longer we're not our identity, the no longer we're not the environment or putting our awareness on the external world, the brain tends to get more orderly and coherent. And different compartments of the brain begin to say, he's selfless, he's not a self any longer, and so there's a coherence and orderliness, and we start getting this synchronization that takes place in the brain. And what syncs together links together. And when you're stressed and insecure and emotional, that fragmented personality keeps a person powerless, because it's like having a multiple personality disorder, but experiencing all the personalities at the same time. We've all been there. Meditation allows that kind of orderliness. And when the front starts talking to the back and the sides start talking to the side, you start feeling more like yourself than you felt in a long time. And all of a sudden, all the things that you were stressing about no longer have any value any longer, because you've taken your attention off them, and the body settles down. Now, that coherent and orderly signal from the brain sends a very coherent and orderly message down the central nervous system, which controls and coordinates all other systems. And all of a sudden, the immune system says, wow, that's a great rhythm. All of a sudden, there's a group of guys playing really great drums, and the orchestra, the symphony now is playing in unison, and the cells are getting a very organized symphonic message. And so the immune system starts making some really healthy white blood cells. The digestive system starts working its timing better, and all of a sudden the heart is starting in harmonics with the brain, and you start experiencing well-being. And so the moment you start experiencing well-being, you go from tissue breakdown, catabolism, degeneration, into a state of regeneration, anabolism, tissue repair. Even the brain cells start growing. Everything starts growing. Cortical thickness starts to happen. Cortisol levels drop. Stress genes are dysregulated and down. They're shut off. They're dampered down. And all of a sudden, the body starts expressing a greater level of health. And now all of a sudden, you go from particle to wave. And the energy starts to move into the heart, and all of a sudden we start seeing the chakra centers lining up, and the person all of a sudden now starts having energy from the body as the mind, because that's where all of it's stored. The body's freed from the chains of the past. And the moment that happens, the side effect is called joy, and that energy starts moving from the hormonal centers. In other words, if you're no longer a sexual identity, you're no longer digesting food, and you're no longer stressing and feeling out of balance, all those energy centers all of a sudden, that energy has to go somewhere. So it starts to move into the heart. You start to fall in love in the moment. You want the moment to last. Your body is feeling enriched, and all of a sudden the heart starts to open. The energy starts moving back to the brain, and it's moving out of the body, and you're generating a bigger field, and all of a sudden you'll be able to focus on possibility, because you're taking your attention off the particle, and now you're focusing on the 99% of possibility that the atom is made of, and you're beginning to select new ideas, new paradigms, new creative states. And so the forebrain starts to work in constructing new archetypes and new patterns, and you see the person moving into a creative state, and all of a sudden they're a different state of expression in their brain.
The key part is, you just touched on it a bit ago, is how we with intention, how we begin linking up and accessing that part of self, because that part of self also is connected to the field. Mm-hmm. All the information is there. Anything right. You need can be brought through from this self mm-hmm. through to this self. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the link-up process, the conscious link-up process.
Well, this is a great conversation. So I'm speaking from my present state of ignorance, of course. But we have two aspects of our consciousness. We have our subjective consciousness. That's the free-willed entity called you and me that has a soul that's on a journey back to source, that gets to like and dislike, gets to be happy, gets to be sad, gets to choose or not choose. It's a free-willed being. That is our subjective consciousness. That's this field around us that exists beyond space and time. It can be measured, but it's an electromagnetic field. Then there is that objective consciousness that exists beyond space and time, that is observing all of this into reality. And that objective consciousness is very sensitive to how we think and feel. Thoughts are electric and feelings are magnetic. And how you think and how you feel, called a state of being, broadcasts an electromagnetic signature that influences every single atom in your life. So if you're walking around every day frustrated and suffering, thinking and feeling that way, what you're saying to that objective consciousness as a subjective creator, okay, divine intelligence, giver of life, who endorses who I'm being, I'm expressing a certain level of suffering today. So now I'm creating suffering in my life, but bringing it in a way that I least expect, that surprises me and leaves no doubt that it's come from you so I can suffer more. So that's karma. Well, karma happens every day, and because we're thinking and feeling in the same way, we keep creating the same external environment. We create that same external environment, we react in the same way of thinking and feeling. That same thinking and feeling then reinforces that same environment, and there's a tango between the outer world and the inner world, and that's called karma. Break the addiction to the emotion, change your habituations of thought and actions, change your feelings that you've memorized, and all of a sudden there is no karma. See, we're not punished for our sins, we're punished by our sins. So then the subjective consciousness, when it marries with or unifies with that objective consciousness, the only way it responds is through how we're being. So you don't pray for your prayers to be answered. You get up as if your prayers are already answered. That state of being is a level of energy that transforms every single atom in your life. The thought sends the signal out, and the feeling draws the event to you. So if you're living in a state of gratitude, what you're saying is, the event has already happened. And now, if I start thinking about when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen, I just return back to the old self. The new self would never think that way. So then, the marriage of subjective consciousness, free-willed you and I, with that objective consciousness who endorses who we are, basically how we think and feel, is a loving intelligence and intelligent love. So then it has an electromagnetic frequency, and when you emulate it as a creator, in other words, you can't create from a guilty, lacking, selfish person. That's not the qualities of the divine. If you are going to create, you better emulate the divine. And what are the qualities of the divine? A loving intelligence and intelligent love. It's got a will that's so much greater than our will. It has a mind that's so much greater than our mind. It's got a love for life that's so much greater than our love for life. It is a consciousness. It's an awareness. It's observant of who we are. So then it has one rule. I honor free will, and I will endorse who you're being. So then when you and I connect to that intelligence by changing how we think and feel, what is the greatest ideal of ourselves? When you move into that elegant state of being and you're in the present moment and you're feeling empowered and divine and enriched and enthusiastic, and now it's time to create. When you create from that state of being, you're emulating the observer. And what you're saying is, observer, take a look at what I'm observing. I'm being like, I'm emulating you. Mm-hmm. So now you're looking down the telescope, I'm the lens of the telescope, and let's magnify that into our life. When that alignment takes place, and you feel connected to something greater, you would never try to force the outcome.